In this real estate photography photo editing tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at how we can quickly and efficiently turn this photograph into something like this, and how you can replicate that time after time using a template to speed through your photo editing workflow and get your photos looking great and back to your clients quicker than ever. It's 2021 and there are tools available to us now that take away the mundane photo editing tasks and allow us to get our photos edited and back to the client quicker than ever. And to enable us to do this, we're going to be using artificial intelligence. And at the moment, there's no better tool for leveraging AI than Luminar AI. So while I've built a whole career around using Lightroom and Photoshop, I'm certainly embracing Luminar AI as part of my workflow. If you would like to get a copy and don't have it yet, I have a discount code which is @Sky10, and you can use that in the link below to save yourself some money at checkout. So now let's assume you've got it. Let's take a look at how Luminar AI can help you with your real estate photo editing. So at the moment, I'm inside my Luminar catalog, and the first thing I am going to do is start a brand new catalog. I don't want my professional work and my personal photography get muddled up, so I think the best way to do that is, rather than have separate folders, you have a whole separate catalog. So I'll come into this folder, Luminar catalogs, and I'm going to save this as real estate demo. We've got a clean slate, and we know that Luminar AI is not holding any database baggage from any other photography. So we can now just come along and import a new folder. And I have two folders here, both containing the same photos, but one as NEF, which is the Nikon's native file format, and one which is the same photos but converted to DNG. Anyway, we are just going to load up the NEF photos. And what you can see here currently is ideal because these look like a right proper mess. It's a selection of photos that I took of a kitchen. These are actually taken for the kitchen designer, entering them into a joinery award. And I have a couple of variations of the same photo. So for example, this one here, I took mostly with natural lighting, but we have the lights just turned on there. And if I use my right arrow key to jump to the next photo, you can see we've got the same shot, but with all the lights turned on. So let's start with this image here, and we'll come into the edit tab. I don't want to go to a template. Ideally, we do want to end up with a template, but it's one that we want to build ourselves. Before I begin any edit, what I like to do is just analyze the image, and I'll often do this in a matter of seconds in my own mind, but let me just talk through my thought process. So I've shot this with a 16 to 35mm zoom lens, so I'm not shooting this with a architecturally specific lens where we can correct the verticals and horizontals in camera. I wanted to shoot at this higher vantage point so I get the oven in the background here, but because of that I'm tilting the camera down and we get these converging lines left and right, also known as keystoning. We want to be able to correct that, and that's one thing that is going to be unique to every single photograph, and you won't be able to build that into a template. But most of everything else that we're going to cover here, I believe we'll be able to build into a template. So with just a few clicks, you should be able to get your photos looking pretty nice. So there are two key elements to getting these photos looking good from an optical perspective. And the first one is down in the professional tab here called optics. So the first thing we'll turn on is auto distortion corrections. So what that allows Luminar to do is access the metadata inside the photo file itself. It knows what lens this was shot with, and it's actually got profiles built into Luminar itself, which will correct for any distortion that your lens has. So that's whether you've got a slight barreling effect where the vertical lines tend to bulge, or pin cushioning where everything gets pulled into the center point. With this lens, things are pretty subtle, but it's definitely corrected it. If I turn it off and you look around the edge of the frame and then I turn it on again, everything's just nice and straight now. The next thing we're going to do is turn on remove chromatic aberration. So if your lens is prone to getting any of that magenta or cyan kind of fringing that you get when you zoom in around the edges, it will get rid of that. We don't need to worry about the advanced settings. So now we've got our lines nice and straight, but they're not parallel. So that's a really important step with shooting architecture and real estate, is just make sure your lines are parallel. And the way we do that is coming into our composition AI. And as well as having access to the crop tool where we can pull the handles in, and if we hover outside of here we can rotate. We also have access to the image transformation tools. So using this arrow here, we'll just reset what we did before. And now we can see using these lines here that we're pretty good with our horizontals when we compare the front of this bench top here to this horizontal line that we know is dead horizontal, but it's the verticals that are the problem. So I'm going to grab the vertical slider here, and I know that if I start actually moving this left or right, if you can actually see what it's doing. I'm doing this to the extreme so you can actually see what it's doing to the image. But basically, by changing the parallel lines and convergence of those lines, by moving this slider, you can find the sweet spot for your photo. And you may find that your photo is actually slightly wonky when you do this. If you get these looking nice and parallel with each other, which they are now, you can now see that we're just ever so slightly wonky. I've got no excuse for having it wonky because my camera does have a built-in horizon line, but I didn't actually turn it on in this photo. So anyway, let's say I'm happy with that, and we'll just close down this tool here. And now those changes are applied. And if we quickly look at our before and our after, just by moving that slider, we've corrected all that convergence, and that's a really important step in making your photos look much more professional. Another issue that you're going to encounter if you're turning on the internal lights and you're shooting at daytime is you're going to have a lot of blue coloured light coming through your daytime balanced lighting compared with the lighting internally. I know they're LEDs now, but it's we'll call it a tungsten lighting, that kind of orangey yellow kind of effect that we have going on. So you'll need to correct that, and you can do that pretty easily. Come into the color section here, and as you can see, we can drop all the saturation from the image, and obviously that's not what we want to do, but we want to talk into the individual colors. So using that concept of reducing the color, we can come straight into the saturation component, how much color is in a particular color. So if I boost the reds up, you can see we're adding more red, and you can identify, okay, it's got a bit too much red in this, so we need to bring that down a little bit. The oranges, if I push that up, now you can see that's exactly where all that tungsten lighting is coming in from. And so we can see when we're at 0, we've got too much of an orangey color cast. And whereas you might think, oh, we just fix the color balance, we'll just push that more towards blue, but then you're going to make your daylight outside even bluer. So the best way to deal with this is just to reduce that color saturation. So if I take that orange away, you can see that straight away we've got a much more neutral image. So if I look at our before, very orangey, and now we've got a nice white pure image. And using this concept, you can also adapt other colors in the scene, but you don't want to change things from how they are in reality. You want to enhance reality, particularly for real estate photography, because you want a fair representation of what the home is actually like. I've just boosted the blues up because I know that this paneling under here was quite blue and it's not really being picked up that well. If you feel like you would like to add some more saturation to the whole image, what you can do is bring that saturation up, but then obviously that's going to boost up those oranges and yellows again, and then you can just take those a little bit further, and then you know that all your colors are getting more saturation, but the orange is being controlled. To get these photos looking good, we really don't need to do too much, and I don't recommend diving into too many of the different options that you have, because we're not creating a creative art piece here. We're trying to enhance reality. We're trying to enhance what our camera captured on site. But we definitely want to do this in as quick and efficient manner as possible. And one of the best tools within Luminar, and most powerful ones in my opinion, is Accent AI. So if I crank this, I'll go heavy all the way to 100, just so you can see what it's doing. If I turn that off and turn it back on, it's added a lot of local contrast. It's also enhanced the colors. It's brought out more texture in the image as well. So if we turn that off and on, it's also harmonized the overall exposure. So if you look, we're quite bright in the top half of the image here and quite dark in the bottom. But if I just flick this on and off, you'll see that that's a more unified lighting throughout the whole scene. And while in my opinion, it's a little bit too much, I'm just pushing that all the way to 100 just so you can see what's possible and see where this can head to if you want it to. But I find somewhere in the more subtle region of about 40, 42, 50, something like this, off, on, we've got a nice improvement there. Another tool that's really useful is Structure AI. So if I open this up and I boost the amount, Here, let's go to 100 just so you can see exactly what's going on. So we've got a lot of detail being added here, a lot of structure as indicated by the tool name. You're also seeing that, oh my God, Anthony, you really needed to clean your sensor before you went out on this shoot. But I didn't. I do have a video on how to clean your sensor if that's an issue for you. You can do it yourself quite easily. You don't need to pay somebody else to do that. But anyway, you can look that up on my channel, how to clean your sensor. But for now, Structure AI, let's just tickle a little bit of that in, not too much. How about 15? Let's turn that off and turn that on. And that's really helping just to pop your image off the screen. Let's have a look at our before and our after. And we're really headed in the right direction with this enhancement. Now, one thing I find that can happen within the AI enhanced section of this, if I turn that off and I turn that on, you get more contrast between the very bright highlights and the sort of mid-tone highlights around this light, for example, and that darkens those down quite a bit. And it's kind of like an optical trick to give a little bit more contrast, and your eye sees more contrast between that light and this panel here. But I feel it does darken down and muddy up some of these brighter tones that you want to kind of keep hold of. So what I would recommend you do, and build this into your preset as well, is actually come into the light section here. One way to brighten it up would be with exposure, but you don't want to touch the exposure in a preset. You want to leave that for individual adjustments if you've got particular photos too bright or too dark when you captured them. But what you can do to make sure that your midtones are coming up is just come into curves. And if you're not big on photography and photo editing, this might seem really daunting when you see this graph and these different color channels. But honestly, it's really simple. All a curve does is basically control the brightness levels of different parts of your image. On the left hand side, you're controlling the shadows. On the right hand side, you're controlling the highlights, the middle of the graph, the midtones. And if you bring the graph up, as I show here, you brighten everything. If you bring it down, you darken. And so you can put points on different places in this curve to control the different brightnesses of the different tones within the image. So if we were to put a point in the shadows and pull that down, it darkens the shadows. At the same time, it's pushing, to keep the curve here, pushing the highlights up, and that's brightening up the highlights. So that's not really what I want to do here. So if you put a point on there and you don't like it, just double click it to remove it. But I do just want to bring these midtones up. So the middle of the graph, we're bringing that up, and that's just helping to reintroduce brightness into these light white panels here. So again, let's have a look at our before and look at our after. So we're kind of back where we were before we applied the AI enhance, but now we've got much more contrast, much more interest in the overall photo. So before, after. I don't feel that there's too much more to do, but a couple of things we'd want to look at is making sure that we're nice and sharp in the image. So if I zoom into this background here, and Luminar renders that for us, basically we've currently got no sharpening, and we're going to utilize Luminar's sharpening tool. If I push that to 100, you can see we've got a really crispy image. It's far too much in my opinion, but you can see that we've certainly got that potential to sharpen things up. So let's ease that off to somewhere around 50 and have a look how that's looking. That's not too bad. And if you ever want to see what a particular tool is doing, it's so easy, so nice. All you need to do is just click that slider there, disable the tool, click it again to turn it on. And once your mouse is in that position, you can turn that off and on and keep your eye on the photo itself and see exactly what that change is making. And it'll allow you to make a much better judgment on whether it's too much, whether you need to go further. I'm happy around 50, so we'll leave that there. These detail sliders, you can also increase those, but I don't feel that the look of those sliders is particularly professional. If I boost these large details, for example, to 100, things start to get a little bit halo-y. So as I increase it and take it away, for sure it's adding contrast within those larger details, but it's just a little bit too heavy. But I don't mind it if we just really lightly feather this in. And my preference is to try and go for subtlety rather than smashing your image with a sledgehammer. So let's turn this off and turn that on. And now we've got a really nice sharp image. As you'll know, one of the absolute great strengths of Luminar is its creative tools and how quickly you can add in sky replacements, which is really useful. Talking real estate, if you're doing exteriors, you can just do a sky swap with one click, which is so useful. because you can't always control when you're photographing a property. So it really opens up possibilities for you if you want to do nice sky replacements. But what I was going to say is there are really great tools within here, but they're not necessarily appropriate for real estate photography. So definitely the sky tool that's a real powerhouse for real estate photography. The augmented sky is like adding elements into a sky, like a moon into a night sky, things like that. So not really relevant. Atmosphere AI is great for landscapes, etc., etc. So it's really useful tools, but not necessarily for what we're dealing with here with architecture and real estate. But one thing that can be useful is actually using this mystical tool here. And this is one where you want to use it with real subtlety. But let me just push it to 100 so you can see what it's doing. Okay, it's kind of like a glamour shot from the 80s where you're smearing some Vaseline over your lens and everything's kind of having a soft glow, soft blur. Kind of like the Autumn effect in landscape photography. It's got that kind of look, but it's like a glow. Obviously, that is absolutely mental. You'd never send that back to your real estate client looking like that. But what if you were to use just a little bit of it? Maybe 5%. So if I turn that off and turn it on, it's barely noticeable. So you might want to push it a bit further. You may not want to include it at all. But if you want to give your images just a little something that no one would really be able to put their finger in exactly what it is that's making this maybe look a little more inviting, because I feel like that soft glow gives it a more interesting and ethereal look without really ruining the sense of the reality of the shot, you can do that. I've just put this at 9, but you could tickle it in at around 3. You could push it further if you want to. I wouldn't recommend going too heavy with a creative tool like this, but you can do that. Let's close that down. Obviously, there's some amazing portrait tools in there, but not relevant for our real estate. Even when you do have your designer caught in the reflection here, we'll crop her out before we send that back. But from here, I feel like we could say we're done. Perhaps we're still needing to take out a little bit of this orange or yellow from the walls and ceiling. Yeah, let's just drop that down just a little bit further. But if we look where we came from to where we're at now, we're looking like a much more impactful and professional image. Because this is a real estate shoot, I am going to leave all of the miscellaneous bits and bobs that you can see in this image exactly where they are, but for my architects and my designers, I might be using tools like the clone and stamp and the erase tool to get rid of things like this power plug just here or the heat pump control here. Also the energy rating that we have on the fridge here, that can go too. In fact, just to demonstrate that tool, let me show you. Let's come to erase. Luminar prepares the image nice and quickly for us. And then all we need to do is just paint over the things we want gone. And hopefully Luminar is going to do a good job of removing that. Let's paint over that there. Paint up here. I'm doing this all with a mouse, not my Wacom tablet, so it's a little harder to get accurate. But let's say that's the area we want to erase. Now we just click erase and cross our fingers that Luminar is going to do a good job for us. Okay, it's a good start, but for some reason it thought that the LG symbol needed to be duplicated twice. So another tool that we have at our disposal, it's a good opportunity to show you that, is the clone and stamp tool down here. Whereas I like the immediacy of the erase tool, and I like the idea of just letting Luminar handle what needs to be erased. It doesn't always do the best job, so I like to have more control. So what I can do is actually come over here and just say I want to sample this area and I'm going to paint it over here. And we can either paint with 100% opacity, or what I prefer to do is just drop that down a little bit, and I can build this up in layers. So by clicking and painting over this several times, I can just paint over that. And this isn't a fantastic job. We've duplicated this bit here, and sometimes if you've got areas of duplication, you don't really want to do that. So you can sample from a different area and just use that to paint in as well. But basically no one would know that there was anything there. So I'll just close that down, and as I do that, it's going to apply those clone and stamp tools that I just applied. And you'll notice that we reverted back to the original image, and now Luminar is taking us back to all the changes. So when you're doing a clone and stamp, what it does is it works on the underlying original image, allows you to make those changes, and then once you've done that, it will bring you back to your fully edited version. So if we look at our before and our after, we say bye-bye energy rating. And if I click here, we're going to zoom out. we can see our whole image here. So while I've taken time showing you the different tools within inside Luminar AI, how they can be applied to your real estate photography, we were talking about efficiency. We need to be able to get this done quickly. That's one of the big benefits of Luminar AI, is trying to leverage some of this AI that's in the software to help us speed up our workflow. So in order to speed up our workflow, what we need to do is leverage these changes as a template. So in order to save what we've done as a template, we just come down to this bottom right hand corner here, click these ellipses, the 3 dots, and we click save. And Luminar gives us 0 options when we save that. So what we need to do to make sure we stay organized is come into our template section here, and we're going to ignore all of the templates that are built in, ready to go for other types of photography. And we're going to come to this star here, which is my collection. And within my collection, we have a section that is my templates. So let's open my templates, and the very last one that we saved, my template, this is the one that we've just edited here. So we want to come to the dots again, the ellipsis, and we need to click rename, because we are good professionals and we like to stay organized. Now I'm going to call that real estate orange remover, just so that I've got a reference that that is one that takes away some of that orange cast. And if this is something that you're going to be doing regularly, what I recommend is you make slight variations of your templates. So we may have something that's very similar that doesn't remove the orange cast for times when we've shot in natural light, or perhaps we've used off-camera flash to bounce some light around. We've got much more authentic colors in the scene. You may also have a slight variation that deals specifically for exterior photos as well. But the great thing about Luminar AI is that accent AI slider that we used and that structure AI slider. The key is in the fact that they're AI. They will adapt to your photos. So the fact that we've set up a template that works well for the interiors, just by the very nature of those tools, they should equally be able to work very well with exteriors. And I can say from personal experience from my architectural photography work that they do. So the last thing I want to do to this photograph, and it is unique to this photograph, is I just want to have a slightly more aggressive crop on this. I should have paid more attention to the fact that we had a reflection of our designer here, so shame on me. Let's bring that in. I also felt like we were getting too much ceiling as well, and we can just bring that down here. I think we want to leave a little bit of the carpet going on there. That's quite nice. And personally, I don't like to have bright elements like these lights cut in half or right at the edge of my frame. I find them too distracting. So we need to just bring that in just so they're gone. And now to apply that, I just click the top bar of that tool. It applies the crop, and there we go. I think that is a much cleaner image. Let's look at our before and after. Doesn't show us the full pre-cropped version, but in any case, I think we've got a marked improvement on our original image. Before, after, before, and after. It's my favorite thing to do once you've finished editing. So now the test will come to see if we can actually jump into a different photograph and apply that same template. Let's open up this one here, which again might be a good representation of when you need to photograph a fairly dark interior and you're having to put all the lights on. Just like with the last one, you're going to end up with a bit of an orangey color cast. So let's see whether our template can do a good fix. Let's jump straight into my collection, and we can just come to real estate orange remover, click that, and boom. I feel like this has become a little too desaturated, this particular version. So that's an easy fix. We just come back into the color section and we just reintroduce a little bit of that orange. It's particularly noticeable on the floor here, that being a wooden floor, we want to retain that color for that purpose. So if we bring the floor all the way back to where it probably should be, I don't know, somewhere around here. Let's say this is the actual color of the floor and this is how we want that, but we don't really want all this orangey ceiling going on. What are we going to do to separate the floor from the ceiling? Well, that's actually really easy. So we can come to local masking. So we're talking to a specific local area of the photo, not the whole thing. And we are just going to paint a mask, and that's going to mask the ceiling and these walls, for example. I'm going to be pretty rough with this, but just as an example, this is how you can do this. Let's say we want to brighten up this area here, and we also want to desaturate it. So we're getting rid of some of that orange. We don't want to push it all the way to a black and white grey, but we certainly want to reduce that saturation of that orange. Let's say that's looking good for this area here, but we don't want it over the whole picture. So all you need to do is do what it says here, paint mask. So using this paintbrush, we can just start to paint. So wherever you paint and this red appears, that is where that effect is going to appear. So let me just really roughly paint over here. Let's paint over that light as well, over this bit. We don't really want to go over anything that's a color that we want to remain. And I just release that. Now we can see that we've certainly reduced that orangey tone. I was painting that at 50%, but you could push that up to 100 if you want to do it really quickly, or if you want to be more refined, you can do it in a series of passes. So there we go, we've got half of the effect, 50% over the ceiling here at the moment. And if I want to be a bit quicker, I can use my right bracket key to increase the size of the brush. By the same token, your left bracket key reduces it, but we're going to have a bigger brush here. And we are just going to, let's crank that up to 65, and I'm just going to paint that mask a little bit rougher around there. You want to be careful doing this because you can start to take away the color from other places, but I'm just wanting to give you a really quick demo. If I turn that off and turn that on, you can see that we've created a much whiter and purer ceiling. So off and on. Now, one really important thing to note with this is that while the template saves most of the changes that we've made, most of the tool adjustments, one thing it's not doing, and it's really important that you just make sure that this is reapplied, is your optics. For some reason, it doesn't want to save those in the template. So just turn those back on before you make image specific adjustments to the composition and the cropping. So now we've turned that on. Now we're in a good place to come back and just play around with our verticals and get those looking better. So what I'm doing at the moment is actually looking at the sides, and although this still looks wonky, I can see that it's actually parallel with this side. What's actually happened is my actual camera, again, is not straight when I took this photo. So I need to rotate the whole crop. So what I like to do when I'm rotating is I keep my eye in the middle part here. And I want to make sure that something that runs close or through this middle part is dead straight when I'm rotating this. So I watch from this marker here, this little line at the top of the crop, and the bottom one there, I know that's the middle of my photo. And as I rotate, I click and rotate, that brings up this grid, and I look at the lines that run from top to bottom at that point, and I can now see where the brick line is, that's running pretty straight. Once you're happy, just close that down. Those changes will be applied, and there you go. You've got a much quicker way of editing that from this to this. Before, pretty flat, straight out of camera image, to this, something with a little bit more pop, and the colors look a little more accurate. So I hope this overview has been useful for you. If you want to get hold of Luminar, I've got a discount code which is @Sky10, and that saves you a little bit of money at the checkout. If you think this is a good option for you and your real estate photo editing, you can use the link below, and that discount code save yourself some money, and I get a small commission from that as well, and that just helps me support the channel and keep providing free content and free education for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Much love to you all. Hope you're keeping well out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers guys. Bye bye.